Before I introduce our next speaker, I'd like to do a little bit of an audience poll. Show of hands, how many of you here are psychic or have had some sort of personal psychic experience? Show of hands? About half. All right, now with a show of hands, out of those who raised their hands, how many of you believe that everyone is psychic? That's even more. Excellent. Maybe you've seen things move out of the corner of your eye. You turn to look, but guess what? There's nothing there. Did you see what you thought you saw? Or was it a figment of your imagination? Interesting to think about, isn't it? Dr. Geri De Stefano Webre and many other intuitive people believe that everyone has the capability of being psychic. And Dr. De Stefano Webre is with us today to share her stories and experiences as a psychic, a psychologist, and a teacher. She wears a lot of hats, but that doesn't stop her from accepting clients that include major corporations and private individuals, actors to musicians, to authors and artists. Why? Because she's one of the best when it comes to assisting people or companies in developing clearer strategies for organization and working environments. Her approach to success may be different than what's considered the norm, but she keeps getting recommended because she's that talented. Dr. De Stefano Webre's clairvoyant communication with spirits, guides, and extraterrestrial beings have always been a part of her entire life, but she repressed it all as a child because her mother didn't want her to become a notorious and hated witch, like the reputation her grandmother had so many moons ago. Thankfully, her psychic abilities came back when she went through university, entered adulthood, and onto her career path. She's learned her intuitiveness wasn't a curse, but rather a gift to help others realign themselves physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So please sit back, relax, and get to know yourself a little bit. And please welcome Dr. Geri De Stefano Webre.
Oh my God. Thank you, David. That was a really amazing introduction. You know, David and I had the most incredible conversation the other day. We connected up because he wanted to get to know me a little bit better so he could do the introduction. But in the conversation, he just poured forth this incredible process that he had been going through in his life that brought him from being a journalist to emceeing and being on the path in that inquiry. I have heard that story over and over and over again in my life. It's a story of spiritual emergence. Some people would say spiritual emergency. But spiritual emergence is a dynamic that seems to be happening more and more as time goes on. What do we mean by spiritual emergence? You're walking along and everything's normal and you're in a 3D reality and you know, you get up, have breakfast, go to work, and then something happens. I'd like to tell you a story. This story happened in 1971. I was about 24 years old. I was in the middle of being trained as a psychic. I was living in San Francisco, and in those days, you know, we were all kind of notorious hippies, but I lived in a household with a woman who was just as keen as I was to learn everything about this reality and the other reality, right? So she came at it from a biblical standpoint. Her interest was, you know, what is indicated in the Bible that gives us some little, you know, breadcrumbs that we can follow in order to become enlightened, to become conscious. Well, of course, I was coming at it from the point of view of a psychic, the metaphysics, beyond the physical. And, you know, in those days, us psychics were pretty woo-woo. I mean, we were pretty out there. Every morning, I loved reading the personals in the San Francisco Chronicle. Well, I am a big fan of Sherlock Holmes, all right? I admit. But that morning, as I was reading along, I came across this announcement. And the announcement read, Highest initiate needs help. Atlantis will rise in 76, and a phone number. Now, how could I possibly not call? Right? And I was really interested in anything Atlantis. So I call up, and this very well-spoken young man said, well, you know, I would really like to meet with you and tell you my story. So we made a date for that afternoon. A little bit later, about 10 minutes before he arrived, I noticed something very peculiar beginning to happen. Everything in our apartment started to vibrate. Everything. Every object, everything. Not really strongly, but just vibrating. And then everything started turning gold. Golden light for us everywhere. The whole environment was just suffused with this amazing light. And then I started vibrating, right? And I thought, what the hell is going on? This man comes through the door. He's very straight, you know, the beige Dockers, the white cable knit sweater, army cut hair. And I thought, wow, this is going to be really interesting. So he sat down and he said, look, he said, I am a representative for one of the biggest paper companies in the United States. And I live in Seattle. And I have come to San Francisco about 2 months ago to do some work. I was in my hotel room one night, and I fell asleep, and I was taken aboard a spaceship. Okay. And I was taken so that I could see planet Earth, and I was shown planet Earth as a movie from the beginning all the way through into the future. And then I was taken far, 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 you know, Star Trek, out in the galaxy. And I was shown things that I can't even begin to explain. They told me that I was someone that would change the world. Now, I've heard that before, right? Some people get a little delusional. But I was really captivated by this man's story because he was really, really sincere. You could tell. He said, I was given the ability to remote view, see far, and to do healing, both you know, right physically and remotely. And that my job on the planet would be to heal people one at a time, raise their vibratory rate, raise their frequency, allow them to get free of suffering so that they could move into a higher dimension. But now, can you imagine trying to, this is 1971, trying to tell somebody this story without being diagnosed as a Looney Tune? What he did was he found a hypnotist in San Francisco. Now this hypnotist, he really wanted to go through a regression. I want to know if this thing I went through was real, was it a dream, did I imagine it, am I delusional, what? The hypnotist regressed him, and it was exactly the same, and even more information was retrieved and remembered as a result of the regression. But this hypnotist, who was not doing very well in his practice, decided that he would use this man Larry as a draw, right? So he started inviting people for healings, mass healing groups, this sort of thing. And really built an amazing business and a very thriving business as a result of this. But Larry was getting burned out, and he had no idea which way to go with this. Long story short, I could see, even though I wasn't a trained psychologist at that time, that in fact, whatever energy this man was running through his system, his body, his circuits couldn't handle it. and I watched him begin to decompensate or to deteriorate, mentally, emotionally, physically. He was married, he had children, he had not called his wife in 2 months. She had no idea where he was. He didn't know how to tell her what he was going through. One night, about literally in the middle of the night, he showed up at my door, and he was in the throes of a complete mental breakdown. So I brought him into the house, and I said, you know, I have an idea. Brought him into the bedroom, laid him out on the bed, and I said, all I want you to do is just relax. I'm going to take you through a little bit of a guided meditation. And as he meditated, I really went into this plea to the universe. Whoever it was that snagged this poor man out of this reality and gave him all of these amazing abilities and didn't prepare him to do this work, please come and help. And so I just held that, and for about an hour I just let this man rest, did a little guided meditation, and then 3 figures began to appear in the room with us. They were maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, blue-skinned, radiant, luminous, in these amazing brocaded, looked like brocade, and they telepathically said, we made a mistake. What? You're not supposed to make a mistake. We made a mistake. We have worked with this being, this soul, for so many lifetimes to bring him to this point. We really neglected to give him strong enough circuits to really be able to handle this level of force. I said, now tell me what to do. So they took me through a process of literally deprogramming him. It's like reversing the calendar, reversing the clock, to take him back to that moment before he went to sleep in that hotel room and was taken to a spaceship. About 4 hours later, he woke up, day was breaking, and he rubs his eyes, he looks at me and he goes, who are you? Where am I? Oh, this worked, yes. And I said, well, you and I, we met at a bar in San Francisco. You got kind of drunk, and I really didn't want you to be on the streets by yourself, so I brought you home. And then he looked really stricken. He said, did we do anything? And I said, oh, no. We just put you to bed. And he left. And I said, oh, by the way, I said, it's really important that you call your wife and your kids. And that was the last I heard from him for about maybe 3 months. One of the things that I did was I slipped my name and my telephone number into his pocket. About 3 months later, he called me up and he said, I know something happened. My wife tells me I lost about 3 months. I don't know where I was. I don't know what was going on. Tell me. And I said, I can't. But I said, I want you to trust that you didn't do anything wrong. In fact, you did a lot of good things. You just weren't ready. And I said, maybe someday you'll remember. Now, and that was it. I've never heard from him again. I have no idea what happened to him. But in 1971, for me, it was the culmination of a personal journey of having contact with interdimensional beings that goes all the way back for me when I was in the crib, right? 1947, Los Angeles. We were living in Santa Monica area. And I, for years, thought this was a dream. I remember looking through the Venetian blinds, standing up in my crib, pre-verbal, and the light, this amazing blue light was just streaming through the windows all around me. It was like, oh, take me, take me. My father came in and he said, what are you doing? Go back to sleep, go back to sleep. And I pointed to the Venetian blinds to the light, and my first words were, blue light. Now, it was years later, I mean, I was in my 40s before my father told me that story. But I remember it absolutely clearly. That blue light has followed me around forever. Yeah, and then when I went back, when he corroborated the story, when I went back and looked in the newspaper reports, it turns out that off the coast of Los Angeles, right in that area, there were all of these lights, spaceships, that were very, very prevalent during that time period, the exact month, in fact, that I remember standing up in my crib. Blue light. My mother was Ukrainian, born in Canada, and her mother, David alluded to it, her mother in Vegreville, Canada, was considered the village witch, wise woman. She birthed the babies, cast the spells, did all kinds of very spooky things. But she had a lot of power in the community. My mother, as a witness to that all of her life, her childhood life, was scared witless by this. So when her own daughter, and here we are in Los Angeles, this is the 50s, right? The early 60s. When her daughter is beginning to talk about what she sees, what she hears, all of these different kind of strange phenomena, my mother closed me down, bang, just like that. You will not do that. That's not okay. What you're doing is a sin, and you will go to hell if you do this. So, being the good Catholic girl that I was, I towed the line. But through that whole period from about, 4, 5, up to 15, 16, I spent most of my time, whenever I had time, outside, looking up at the sky, looking heavenward. In the middle of the night, I would sneak out, and I was looking for something. I wanted them to come and take me back home. Whatever this was going on here, I didn't like it. And a lot of strange things happened in my life, but I won't get into all of that. About the time, one of the things that happened for me through that whole period was that I could hear people speaking the words, but I heard what was underneath the words, what they really were saying, what they really meant. And that's what I would respond to. Can you imagine the nuns at school dealing with someone who's responding to what they're really thinking? It was not good at all. I got a lot of hand slaps because of that. But I tried to be good. Now, psychic abilities. Yes, I believe that every single person has psychic abilities, and it runs the spectrum from, just kind of that gut level feeling that you have to off the charts, fully operational psychic. We're seeing, the Chinese government over the last 20 years has identified over 100,000 children in their population as super psychic children. Isn't that amazing? 100,000. We're kind of trying to figure out what they intend to do with all these psychic kids, but the research and the phenomena that's coming out is off the charts. So, my sense in terms of the work that I've been doing in this life is that it's pretty simple. We have 5 physical senses. Now, what do those senses do? Anybody? Taste, smell, what? Yeah, but why do we have them?
Sense of perception, so we can see our world.
Right.
Outside world.
Right, and so that we survive, right? So if I smell smoke, there's something that goes off in my brain that says I better get out of here, right? So for every one of those 5 physical senses, we have a psychic backup sense, right? So for sight, we have clairvoyance. For hearing, clairaudience. For touch, clairsentience. And for smell and taste, we also have backup sense. What are those senses there for? To survive, right? If we develop, if we acknowledge that we have the hardwiring to trigger those psychic abilities, it really enhances our survival on this planet, right? Why do we want to enhance our survival? Well, it's not just about working and eating and doing all that stuff. This body is the vehicle for our soul, for our spirit, for our consciousness. And as we allow that ability to come forward, we begin to create ways, we begin to see opportunities for that consciousness to expand, for that frequency in our body to get higher, right? To be able to access, not just be in this particular level of reality, but to maybe shift gears a little bit and go upward, onward into something else. Now, why would we want to go into another dimension? Alfred later on, I'm kind of Alfred's warm-up act. He will be really speaking in depth about the concept of the Omniverse, that encompasses everything, right? For me, what I try to do, what I look at doing, not just with my clients and students, but with myself, is how do I use my abilities? How do I use that higher frequency, that consciousness, to begin to navigate beyond the matrix, beyond this level of reality, to access these higher dimensions? And in accessing those higher dimensions, can we begin to answer some of the questions that have plagued us as humans forever? Who am I? What am I up to? Where am I going? How am I going to do this? Right? Those basic questions. So, if you feel that you have a little bit of ability or a lot of ability, one of the things that I've looked at in my life is what triggers these abilities. And you're just walking along and suddenly something happens. Sometimes trauma can really get your abilities going. You know that thing of, the child gets pinned under a car, the mother, superhuman ability, can pick that car up and save the child, right? She didn't even think. She just went into some kind of hyperdrive and was able to do it. Sometimes traumas, such as abuse, certain illnesses, can trigger a much more heightened perception within us. Why? Because we really want our consciousness to survive. Let me think, 1968, my mother died. And she died after many, many years of having cancer. She and I didn't get along, as you can imagine. I was way too rowdy for her. She died of cancer, and 6 months later, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And when I came out of the recovery room, the doctor, who was the same doctor that treated my mom, I was bandaged from here down. I was like 18, 19, modeling in LA. I thought I'd lost everything. And he looked down at me and he said, there's one of two ways you can lead your life from this moment on. You can fear cancer and you'll die within 5 years. Or you can choose to live one day at a time. Well, you know, the one day at a time sounded a lot better. And I also decided at that moment to drop out, right? Leave Los Angeles, go to San Francisco, and try to figure out what my life was about. Trauma. Suddenly, in that kind of period of my life where mother dies, leaving home, having cancer, really kind of confronting my own mortality in a way, I suddenly was wide open psychically. My poor first husband, he walked into the kitchen one morning and I looked at him and I could see into his body like an X-ray. I could see the blood, the organs, the muscle, the bone. There was this energy around his body, this light. And I started talking to him about this, and he freaked out. He was very, very upset. And I really thought at that point that I was having some kind of psychotic break. It didn't let up. It got worse and worse and worse. My dead mother would appear right next to the bed as I was making love to my husband. She didn't like sex. And it would be like, go away. Don't you have some place to be? Anyhow, after only 11 months of being married and my poor husband thinking that I was really out there, I found myself actually homeless in San Francisco. And some very kind people took me in and said, gee, we have a friend who's a psychiatric social worker. Maybe you should have a conversation with her, right? So I sat down, and I had been reading psychology for years because I wanted to figure out what made my mom tick, and the nuns and everything else. I was very curious. So I sat down with this woman, and I said, look, in the diagnostic manual here on page 386, it describes like psychotic breakdown, personality disorder, right? And she listened to my story and she said, you know, you're not crazy. You've just opened up psychically. Well, what's that? What the hell is that? Well, I'll show you, right? So she became my first teacher. She taught me how to meditate. She taught me how to ground my energy, how to get real back in my body, because I was floating all over the place. Seeing things, hearing things that I just could not deal with in everyday reality. I mean, how can you go to work when you're being trailed by, you know, 50 entities who all want to talk to you at the same time? Right? Can't do it. Anyhow, she was really able to help me quite a bit. Trauma does trigger that survival sense psychically. Another thing that triggers your psychic abilities are drugs, especially the psychotropic drugs like LSD, mescaline, peyote, magic mushroom. These drugs, you know, whatever your particular idea is about the use of drugs, those particular drugs have been used for time out of mind, from Neolithic times, in fact, by people to open the portal, open the gates of perception, speak to the gods, who are they, and to make sense of reality and the cosmos that they live in, right? So what happened in my era of the 70s, 60s, and 70s, everybody was taking drugs. Some people could tune in and move into a higher state of consciousness, and other people became the walking wounded. What we discovered about the use of those drugs in those days is that it really confronted you with your files, with the programs that you were holding, with the stuff that was running you in your life. So, in any event, drugs can trigger And they've been, just remember that they've been used, and they are still being used to this day. Environment and culture has a lot to do with how you feel about your psychic abilities. I look at DNA hardwiring. That's been my real area of interest. Some people, some genetic groups are far more hardwired for clairvoyance than others. Some genetic groups are hardwired for other things. Right? So it's always interesting to me when I'm reading people to look at how are you hardwired, how can you work with that, and how can you maximize those abilities so, number one, life here gets better, and number two, that you can make some space in there for the soul, for the consciousness to become more evolved, more developed. Culture. If you are raised in a certain culture, like I was, that says, this is a sin, right? Being psychic is a mortal sin. Doing that kind of divination is the devil's work. Well, you know, naturally, you're going to survive. You want to close down. That's what will happen. All right, now, oh, got through that. Okay. Anomalous events at times can also trigger psychic abilities. Anomalous events. We hear a lot in the contact community about, you know, either being in bed, the bed shaking, suddenly something appears, light, beings, entities, driving along in the car, bright lights, whatever. These are worldwide events. These are events that really shift your perception and your paradigm mightily. I work a lot with contactees in my practice, and you know, so many of them are trying to make sense of how this happened to them and what they're going to do with it. For me, my anomalous event was going camping. I went camping with a partner, and it was this very remote part of Northern California. And it was right on the border of the Hoopa Indian Reservation. I didn't know it at the time, but that's an area that is very, very active with UFO activity. Anyhow, it was a great camping trip, very quiet. We're out in the middle of nowhere, and there's no one else around. So, middle of the night, we're in our tent, asleep, and all of a sudden, it was like the Klieg lights came on, right? The light outside was so blindingly brilliant. And I'm laying there, and I'm paralyzed. I can't move a muscle, right? And I try to, you know, poke the partner, you know, tell me that this isn't happening. And I got so paralyzed, and I know it was fear, or maybe something else, but I could not move. And I just closed down, and I went back to sleep. I just said, you know, whatever this is, I cannot deal with this. Next morning, David says, wow, I had the weirdest dream last night. I dreamt that everything was lit up and I couldn't move and I was paralyzed and I didn't know what was going on. And I just said, oh boy, this sounds like a UFO kind of thing. After we got home, we went and talked to this man that we knew, Bart, who is an Indian medicine man. And Bart said, oh yeah, that happens up there all the time, right? This is what happens. Now, I came away with that event, from that event, being really upset with myself that I got so fearful and so closed down that I couldn't actually just get up, walk out, and see what was going on and make that contact. Because after all, in my life, wasn't that what I had been asking for my whole life as a child, as an adult? Take me home, right? And there they were. So I decided that that was the beginning for me of a different kind of inquiry. Get more information, keep it practical, use some discernment, right? You know, not everything we hear is necessarily the truth or accurate. So how do we know? Well, we go inside of our inner knower. That part of us, you know when you're confronted with the truth. You know that. And give yourself the power to know that. Now, another anomalous event. 1971 again was kind of a banner year for me. I had done a process in a group, I was in the group, where we did past lifetime regression. And I didn't even know if I quite believed in past lifetimes, actually. But I went through this regression, and I had, in fact, contacted a life in which I died of bubonic plague. And not very well, actually. It was a kind of a bad death. Well, about 6 months later, I was coming home from work, and I was very hot, had a temperature, you know, I was really swollen under my armpits, ended up in the hospital, and the doc said, oh, you know what, you're just overtired, go home, go to sleep. So I went home, went to sleep. 3 days later, woke up just enough to understand that I was really, really ill. A friend of mine took me to the hospital, and I went into a coma for about 10 days. During that coma, it was like watching a movie, right? My whole life kind of came up in front of me. I was forgiving my mother and my father and my first husband, and then, you know, floating over Atlantis. Remember, I was a big Atlantean queen. And really, a lot of dreams, a lot of really interesting images. Finally, went into an image of, or a sensation of being pulled through this long tunnel, dark tunnel. And at the end of the tunnel was this brilliant light. And as I approached the light, in front of me was this kind of membrane, right? And as I pushed my right hand through, my entire life passed before my eyes. It really does. When you get near death, it really happens that way, right? So my right hand is through the membrane, my left hand starts to go through, and I begin to see all the images of my future life. I see my children, I see my work, I see what I have to do in the world. And as I pulled back, now understand that beyond the membrane was this amazing apparition of a shining lady, just brilliant. And she kept beckoning me, come on, you know, you can do this. And when I pulled back, she simply smiled and turned, walked away, and I had this sensation of being at the bottom of the swimming pool, all this water. And I started floating up to the sun, and as I broke the surface, there I am in this hospital room. And sitting next to me is the doctor, an English doctor, Elsie Rose. I said, what's wrong with me? Well, my dear, had you lived in 12th century England, we'd say you had the plague. But since you're in 20th century America, we're just going to call it an unspecific viral infection. Plague? Turns out I was one of 12 cases that year in San Francisco. Unresolved stuff from that past life regression, I think. But what happened for me was that suddenly my abilities were even bigger and at the same time more grounded. Because at that moment, I knew that I was no longer on personal time. It wasn't about Geri's life. It was actually about being on the lady's time. And she said, you have work to do. So from that moment on, I made a decision, a choice, to help people like myself who had all these different kinds of things that would happen to them, spiritual emergencies, breakdowns, breakthroughs, that I would help them to get through it in a practical, solid way so that they could function, not just in this world, but in the interdimensional. And that's what I've been doing for the last, what, 40 years? Yeah, long time. Now, where are we with time? What do we do? What are we doing here? How much time do I have left?
When did we start? 10 o'clock?
No. No. Okay. What I was thinking that let me stop. Are there any questions before I go on? Anything that comes to mind? Yeah. Pardon?
To answer your question earlier, though, you started
41
41 minutes ago.
minutes ago. Thank you. Awesome. Okay. Yes.
What are orbs, in your opinion?
Oh, wow. The unseen, right? I mean, this is energy that's around us all the time. And, you know, it's interesting to me because children see them.
Yeah.
I saw them when I was a kid. We decide not to see them when we go to school, right? God, I don't know. Kindergarten and first grade, bad idea. Energy that's all around us, that's interdimensional, I believe they're almost like messengers to remind us that there's something else going on. You know, and as children, when we look at them, they're so beautiful, and we play with them, right? I remember kind of bouncing them around. They would do what I told them to do, within limits. So, messengers, you know, that kind of, just remember that you live in a world where you can see certain things, and then there's a whole range of things that you're not seeing, right? Yeah.
Do you think your past life regression triggered the bubonic plague?
Oh, totally. Without a doubt, without a doubt. And for me, the way it works is this. Trauma that we have in this life, whatever the trauma is, lays down on a cellular level, right? So even though we might do talk therapy or emotional release work or all kinds of things, that trauma can get so embedded in there that even, let's say, after years of therapy, people will still report, I just can't seem to get past this, right? The reason they can't get past it is because they're not releasing it from that cellular level. Now, in terms of past lives, that memory of trauma or, let's say, a bad death or certain things that we've gone through lays down in the cellular memory of the soul, of the consciousness, right? And it's carried forward into this life. Now, it can stay submerged forever, right? But if you do something that triggers it, and in my case, I went through a regression, and it brought up all the pain and all the fear of dying, really a horrible death. And not just me, but thousands of people, right? So that memory it was like I was reliving it in that regression. It activated the cellular memory, and on some level, whether it was a soul agreement or whatever, I decided or made a choice to work it out, to survive from it, but to also come to a different view of it. That in fact, I had an opportunity in that life to get more conscious, to get more spiritual. But all I did was rail at God. Right?
That sort of begs the question, do you think you're stronger because of your experience?
I think it made me stronger in some ways, but it made me fear less. Because going through that and a near-death experience, you know, what's the worst that can happen to us? We die. And I'm saying, what's so bad about that? Honestly, moving from this reality, dying, leaving the body into the next reality, your consciousness is right there 100%. and you're free. You're totally free. Right? So if we begin to not fear death, and I believe that that's why it happened to me in this life, I needed to not fear death because the work I've done, the people that have engaged with me, sometimes have been truly terrifying. And there have been times that my life has seriously been at risk. But I don't care, you know, and the minute I put that fearless energy out, they get it and they don't bother me. Right? So yes, I think it was really all about me becoming stronger and fearless. Yeah. Yeah.
So if I understand this, in the previous life, you were given an opportunity, you made a bad choice.
I made a really bad choice.
This time you revisited that choice,
Yeah.
you made a better choice. That's a fairly common theme here with a lot of people you work with.
Mhm.
Phobias, whatever it is, a lot of them.
Yeah. Yeah, in my readings, I don't do past life readings per se, but if that information comes up for people, there's a reason. And so I invite those people, if they want, to revisit that time, that place, and to be able to move past that energy in their body now, because sometimes it's the one thing that's holding them back. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I
Yes.
kind of feel like there's a switch that's not turned on, like it's turned off. And like in most of my life, I wasn't even aware of the switch.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And then you get those little niggles, right? And you know something's there. You know, the thing is that I believe that one of the main things that helps the switch to turn on is meditation, in fact. And it doesn't have to be anything formal. How many of us in our life every day don't actually take 10 minutes to just sit and space out, stare at a wall? We don't, because we're wasting time.
Do you think that you have to have like creative yoga or something like
No,
that?
I don't. I mean, I think that those things can bump it up and accelerate it, for sure. But you don't need to do that. What you need to do, if you need to do anything, is to be able to, number one, acknowledge that you do have some psychic ability. Give yourself permission. That's number one. Number two is being able to open the mind, relax, unstress long enough to be able to feel the energy, the current running in your system, right? And then little by little, if you do, you know, one of my teachers, Helen Palmer, she just kept saying, you don't have to meditate 5 hours a day, 10 minutes every day, because the consistency will get you there. It builds, right? And she was right, you know. Over a period of time, I began to feel grounded and feel my energy and just kind of play with it a little bit, acknowledge it. And the deeper into meditation I would go, the easier it would get and the further out I could get. It's just consistency. Now, if one wants to follow a spiritual path, and I recommend a spiritual path for everyone on some level, not religion, spirit, there are many spiritual paths that address this, just this one issue. You know, how do we as humans make enough space in here, get rid of enough files, enough of the programming, to be able to have that energy move through, to become more conscious, to become enlightened, to become creator gods. We can do that. Right? Simple, breathe, just simple, sit. Simple, 10 minutes every day. Right? Doesn't have to be a big deal. You don't have to go to class. You don't have to, you know, bend your body into 5,000 different positions. You know, just sit. Children, look at children. You know, they have this imagination that is amazing. they spend a lot of time, you know, kind of spacing out and playing and, you know, having imaginary friends and all kinds of stuff. And if they could just keep doing that and hold on to that a bit in their life, it would be so much simpler for them, for all of us. Yeah, so that's a way of kind of getting those abilities moving. Anybody else? Yeah.
You speak of these different senses that we have. Is there a correlation, you think, that our capacity of our brain to use our senses become more enlightened as our brain usage becomes more?
Say that last part again. I couldn't quite hear you.
Is there a correlation between our amount of brain usage that we use and our senses, our ability, our senses to be more?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Neuroscience is telling us that the brain is very plastic, and even people who have had strokes or very debilitating neurological diseases can actually bypass the damaged parts and rewire, right? So if there's no damage, if there's no trauma to the circuitry, to the brain, would it be possible? Yes, to access those parts of the brain that in fact create more perception, more psychic abilities, more. Yes, we can, absolutely. We're seeing children, you know, we hear crystal children, indigo children, star children, right? All of these different generations that are coming in. What I'm seeing over the heads of many of these star children and crystal children is a whole other second set of chakras. A whole second aura sitting right up over their head, almost like an after image, not quite fully formed, but there. What's that, right? It's a whole different level of hardwiring that these children are coming in with, right? And they are meant to really do something pretty spectacular, I think. But one of the things that I actually got in a reading was that with this one specific girl I'm thinking about, I said, you will come to a point in your life where you will have to survive in such a specific laser-like way that at that moment, that second set will activate and literally drop into your system, lock and load, and it will be like turbocharging your system. And no matter what's going on, you'll survive it, right? And she just said, yeah, I know. Wow. I thought I was saying something pretty profound, but yes.
When children are very young, we've all seen this 1, 2, 3, there is that innate, just openness, you know,
Yeah.
you can see the way they look at you. And then often, once you get into, 4, 5, 6, there's more, they become more cognitive. And I'm wondering, and it's just something, that I see in, I do work as well, and as a musician, and you just, children respond to you, and then at that certain point, they start thinking more, and it becomes more analytical. Do you think that is kind of, that's just innate to a degree, that they're going to lose some of that? Because I mean, you hear a lot of folks, again, later on in life, in their later teens or mid-teens or adulthood, then they're, getting back that psychic ability.
Yeah.
I was just wondering what you think on
I have a lot of thoughts about this. I really do. I think that children.
A lot of it will be, you can see it's, with their parents, a lot of it is parental, programs.
Oh, sure.
As well, but
Yeah, but even with parents that are supportive of their children's abilities or whatever, the same thing seems to keep happening, right? And the same thing is this. The minute that they are exposed more and more to computers, video games, TV, school, right? The more they lose that, or it just goes dormant. this is a big case here for homeschooling, okay? And research has been, especially, you know, with the school strike. I mean, I don't know if you've been listening to the radio, but there's, yeah, right? But there's a lot of people that are really making a case for homeschooling. And the research seems to indicate that homeschoolers do far better in university than anybody ever thought. More creative, more perceptive, more of everything, right? Because they haven't been shut down in the same way that most children are shut down, right? So, yes, I think it's a real influx of the culture on the child, right? I remember sitting in a classroom looking out the window, right? And the teacher said, stop, you know, stargazing, stop imagining, stop fantasizing, stop, get back to work, right? And, you know, you hear that often enough, and it's like, okay, right? And you're back in the box. The lovely thing about psychic abilities is that I believe that they really help us to get under and over and beyond the matrix, this 3D reality. You get under it and over it, right? And this opens up a whole different perspective, eventually, of the Omniverse, this big thing. I mean, we're on planet Earth, right? And it's big enough when we think about it. And then we look at the stars in the middle of the night, and it's like, wow, that's huge. Some people go away from that feeling incredibly insignificant. You know, who am I? What can I do? I don't have any power here. Other people take that yearning to be part of something huge, to be out there, that they want to navigate that omniverse. Some do it with drugs, some do it psychically, some do it with video games, some do it. We all want to know. We all want to know more, right? So navigating the omniverse, this is part of the puzzle, this ability to really reckon with your own psychic power and to be able to use it in all those practical ways, but then to access all of those other dimensions, right? All of those other dimensions. Blue light, I'll end with this. So I was being trained as a psychic, and one of my teachers said, well, you're very, very good. You've got good circuits. We want to train you as a trance medium. Oh, wow, far out. Let's go. Right? So her way of training was to put me into a full trance and to invite entities in. And then she would interview them, right? And the interview was, you know, will you pay attention to Geri's body, not abuse her circuits, where are you from, what kind of information are you going to download? You know, we don't want any garbage here. It took months. She went through over 100 different beings, different sessions that we went through. And I was really at the point of wanting to just give up. You know, it's like, I don't know about this. Surrender my personality and my ego and vacate my body so that this thing can come through? No. Finally, one day, this being came through, and he made all the agreements with Helen. And she said, what is your name? And he laughed, he chuckled. He said, oh, you humans, you always want names. You want to know where we're from, you know. He said, just tell her to visualize the blue light, that electrical quality of blue light that she saw when she was in the crib. We have been with her her whole life, and she's got to get to work, right? So I came, she got me out of trance, and I look at her face, and Helen Palmer was a woman who didn't shake very easily at all, and she was kind of white. And she was kind of shaky, and she said, you know, I think I need some sugar. And so she downloaded and told me what happened, and that's what happened. So that blue light, whatever that thing is, has been with me. I did a lot of transmediumship work in my early days, and then I took a break. And the reason I took a break, and it was a 30-year break, in fact, is because when you do that kind of full trance work, it really accelerates your cellular function, and you age very, very fast. And if you have any illnesses in your body, it exacerbates them. And I'm so vain. You know, I didn't want my skin to be all wrinkly. And so I put it aside, and I developed another way of doing the work. But recently, this is kind of interesting, I have a friend, Gilbert, who lives in Mexico, and he and I were trained by the same people. And Gilbert said, look, Geri, you know me really well. I need a reading, but I want you to do a full trance reading. And I said, no, I don't know, I'm not interested. No, I really am. And he badgered me for months. And I said, well, how can I do that? You're in Mexico, I'm here. Well, you can do it on Skype. What? Anyhow, he was so insistent, and I finally got off the stick, and I actually did a full trance reading. And he reports to me that afterwards, this same blue light energy said, oh, and now we look forward to working very closely with her in the future. And so when he said that, I said, oh, does that mean I have to do more trance readings? And he goes, yep, that's what it sounds like. So I'm working on it. I just want you to know it's a work in progress. Any other questions, and then we'll stop. Yes?
Is that blue light the same if we got a form yet? Or is it just a dispersed blue light?
Is it a...
Has it got a form?
No, it has no form. It's more of a sensation than an... Well, when I go into trance, I see it. And it's like just a field of vision of blue light. It's just there. It doesn't come from anywhere. It's just there. And it has no form.
Do you do regressive?
I do a lot of regression work.
Do you live there?
Pardon? I live in Vancouver. Yes, I live in, right in Vancouver. I do, yes. Anyone who would like a card, I have them. Also, pitch. I do teach classes, and I teach basic psychic development classes to help people to just get practical and basic. That leads eventually into what I call the one-year seminar for transformation. The one-year, I've done 5 in my life, one-year seminars. And I will do maybe one more seminar. Because the one-year seminar usually ends up being 2 to 3 to 4 years of working with a group. The one-year seminar is about personal transformation. The main bottom line for my work is you can be psychic and you can work psychically if you dump your files, if you dump your programs, your issues, the trauma, the stuff that gets in the way. What will be left are your natural abilities and the space within you to work with them. So the transformational seminar, the one-year seminar, takes people through all of those processes. It's very rigorous. Needless to say, the attrition rate is pretty great. But those people that get through the seminar have gone on in their lives to be really, truly amazing people. I believe that we're here to be happy. I really believe that we're here to complete our missions and to really do what we're meant to do. But what is it, right? So very often the seminar really uncovers that. So that's what I do. All right, thank you so much for being such a good audience. Thank you, David.